To all those worried about spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2. The first chunk of this video will not go into specifics about the plot or show any visuals that may harm a new player's experience. I will be talking about the story in detail later on in order to effectively illustrate my points, but I will make it very clear when that is about to happen. Also, beware the comment section. The Last of Us was a phenomenon when it released all the way back in 2013. Considered by many to be developer Naughty Dog's magnum opus, it was widely praised as a masterpiece, as a game that finally proved the medium was a legitimate art form, and any dissenters that questioned that praise were quickly shot down as contrarian, fanboys of a different console, or simply trolls. My personal opinion of the game from day one was that it was very good, but also pretty overrated. There wasn't anything about it I could point to as a crippling flaw, it just didn't blow my mind the same way it did others, though I did appreciate it much more when I replayed its remastered release on PS4. It's amazing what a difference 60 frames can make. The Last of Us Part 2 has been much more contentious, being widely criticized before it was even out. Back in April, several of the game's major plot points were leaked online, and the response to these revelations was overwhelmingly poor, with angry fans calling the unreleased sequel a betrayal that prioritized pandering over good storytelling. The backlash only continued when Sony, in a foolish effort to put the toothpaste back in the tube, started wildly copyright striking as much content about the leaks as they could, including simple discussions, people just reporting that the leak had happened, and even Twitter memes. The whole situation was a gigantic mess. Now that it's actually out, The Last of Us Part 2 is being talked about as much as the original, though this time for very different reasons. While mainstream critics were quick to once again shower Naughty Dog with perfect tens, declaring their newest effort a triumph of interactive entertainment, reactions from the player base have been all over the map. Some absolutely hate it and want to pretend it never happened, others love it and will defend its glory until their last dying breath. As for me, having now seen The Last of Us Part 2 to its bitter end, accumulating roughly 23 hours of total playtime, I think it's fine, and also incredibly overrated.
I give it a 6.
A 6?
Wow. Like a solid 6. Okay.
I had a decent enough time playing through it, and there are plenty of aspects of the experience worth praising, but the overall story, writing, and pacing are big steps down from the first game. While it's unquestionably a masterclass in technical presentation and improves on the gameplay in some ways over its predecessor, there's no doubt in my mind that Part 2 is inferior to Part 1 by a sizable margin. Before I get into exactly why I feel the way that I do, allow me a minute of your time to tell you about this video's sponsor, Ridge Wallet. When we all eventually find ourselves in the post-apocalypse, the last thing anyone needs is some big, bulky currency container taking up your precious inventory space. Thankfully, Ridge's line of minimalist wallets solve that particular problem with their sleek, lightweight, compact design. Each Ridge wallet can hold up to 12 cards with additional room for cash and fit easily in your front pocket. There are over 30 styles and colors to choose from, so you'll undoubtedly find one that suits your particular taste, and the guys at Ridge are so confident you'll love their product, they'll let you try out a Ridge wallet for 45 days, and if you're unsatisfied with your purchase, simply send it back for a full refund. Get your Ridge wallet today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/nobody and use code NOBODY for 10% off your order. Links in the description and pinned comment down below. Big thank you to Ridge for supporting the channel. Let me start by acknowledging what the game does right. Speaking solely on a visual and auditory level, Part 2 is a crowning achievement, no doubt. Everything from the environments to the character models are stunningly beautiful and packed full of small details that add believability and flavor to the setting. Each sound heard, whether it's the crack of a rifle shot or the chirps of a cricket, is perfect, and the acting from all involved is top tier. There's not a weak performance or line delivery anywhere to be found. I've also got to call out the excellent music. I'm a sucker for a good acoustic guitar track, and Last of Us 2 is stuffed full of them. Hell, I'm actively listening to the soundtrack while I type out this script. I had a handful of animations derp out on me, and I even managed to find myself under the map once, but these are easily written off as flukes that take away nothing from the excellence on display. I've seen reports that the game cost at least $100 million to make, and you can see every penny on the screen. When it comes to the gameplay, the game definitely feels better than the original, and I think that it's good, but not good enough, and let me explain what I mean by that. I think most people would agree that the core mechanics of The Last of Us, the stealth, the combat, the exploration, were never the best parts of it. It was a jack of all trades but master of none, and had the occasional quirk. But that was okay. It was satisfying enough, it was engaging enough, and was able to carry its weight for the whole length of that game. The Last of Us Part 2 has very similar gameplay at its core, but there have been tweaks and small additions. The biggest ones are the option to go prone, which I mistakenly dismissed as not all that useful at first because I was so used to just crouching like before, but I eventually realized it's a must for effective stealth in some sections. And they added a dodge button to melee encounters, but I don't think it's that well implemented and sort of hurts the flow of throwdowns. Those aren't the only tweaks you'll notice. I for one really like the added touch of your opponents calling out in horror at the sight of their friend being killed.
It's Colin! Someone got him!
But it's fair to say that the gameplay here is more Last of Us. Just like the first game, it's solid, and there's a visceral brutality that can't help but capture your attention, but none of its systems excel. The problem is that Part 2 is significantly longer than the first game, 10 hours longer, give or take, and the gameplay loop isn't strong enough to carry it for the entire duration. There's only so long you can go around stabbing, shooting, and opening drawers over and over before it starts to feel tedious, and Part 2 absolutely crossed that line for me. It doesn't help that plenty of encounters overstay their welcome with oversized arenas and inflated enemy counts. I'd creep around, taking out like 5 or 6 guys, satisfied with my performance, only to realize there was a whole other half of the map with another 6 or 7 baddies to deal with. Ellie's stealth kill animation also contributes to this issue, being way too drawn out, and after watching her leisurely stab people in the throat about 100 times, I couldn't help but question why someone with years of experience would choose to go about things in the slowest, most inefficient way possible. You can eventually get an upgrade to change this animation into one that's much faster and more proficient, but it probably should have been this way from the get-go. There just came a point where I started putting less effort into sneaking and started combat just to get things over with faster. There is an attempt to freshen things up in the game's second half, which gives you different guns and melee options to try out, but on the flip side, all of your skills and weapon upgrades are essentially reset, so it doesn't do much to stave off the monotony. But whatever, right? Most people are coming to The Last of Us Part 2 because they care about the story. They want to see the second chapter of Joel and Ellie's tale in the post-apocalypse. Naughty Dog has a strong reputation when it comes to crafting narratives in their games, so there's no way they could possibly mess this up, right? Right? Without getting into spoilers yet, here's my overall take on the story as it's presented here. It's needlessly long, poorly paced, overly relies on contrivance to get from point A to point B, is presented in a disorganized manner, and doesn't end up saying anything new or particularly worthwhile. It's a game that thinks it's far more profound than it is, and it sacrifices quality of writing and logic to deliver its message. I'm not even upset about the big thing everyone is upset about. I'm more frustrated that the mini-golf tournament heard around the world was wasted on a tale that ends up feeling pointless. Yes, I know, the pointlessness is the point, but if you're going to tell someone they more or less wasted 20 plus hours of their time, you better have tight writing to back it up, and I think that's where The Last of Us Part 2 fumbles. I'm not saying the narrative is a total trash fire. I'm not saying I'm some arbiter of quality that could have done better. I write game reviews on YouTube, for fuck's sake. And there is some great dialogue and environmental storytelling. But there are clear issues here that jumped out to me throughout my playthrough that make it hard for me to understand how anyone could rate this experience a 10 out of 10. At this point, I'll have to go into specific detail to properly convey my issues with the plot, but before those of you that want to avoid spoilers check out, there is something I'd like to convey to everyone watching. I know there are going to be those of you that agree with my takes, and there'll be just as many of you that think I'm totally off base, and neither group is invalid. If you love the game, keep loving it. If you hate the game, keep hating it. But either way, I strongly encourage you to seek out and watch other reviews that offer a variety of perspectives. This is all just individual opinion, and you're all free to formulate your own. We good? The pitchforks and torches down now? Who am I kidding? This is the internet. So, Joel dies. Only 2 hours into the story, he finds himself on the receiving end of newcomer Abby's prized putter. This moment, which was spoiled months in advance, is the big thing that sent fans into a frenzy. It's been described as cheap, as a death solely done for shock value, and an unceremonious end to a character that deserved better. But here's the thing that some of you may find surprising. I don't really have any major problems with Joel dying, or the way in which he died. Is it incredibly convenient that Abby just happened to stumble upon the man she's been after for several years? Yeah, but plenty of stories rely on tragic coincidence as their jumping off point. It's not the best way to set up a major incident like this, but I don't think it's an invalid one either. Are Joel and Tommy far too trusting of this group of strangers? Maybe, but I found this attitude easy to justify given that they've been living in relative safety and comfort in a massive community for the last several years. I don't think it's a stretch to assume they've let their guard down some, especially since Abby just helped them survive a torrent of infected. But what about the death itself? Getting slowly beaten to death with a golf club is a bad way to go, and surely Joel should have gone out in a more dignified manner. Well, no. Not only has this world been established as brutally harsh and violent, but I see this demise as Joel getting his comeuppance, as karma coming back to bite him for his selfish, arguably villainous actions at the end of the original Last of Us. He essentially doomed the world so he could have a daughter again. Our time with Ellie as Joel in the first game made this decision one we could understand, sympathize with, and even champion, but there's no getting around the fact that what Joel did was self-serving, and most people, especially the Fireflies he butchered, would see him as the bad guy. And when you find the bad guy you've been hunting, he's not going to get a heroic exit. Some people also think Abby allowing Ellie and Tommy to live is dumb, and she should have known they would come after her, but she's completed her singular goal and has no reason to add to the body count, so I don't have an issue with her sparing these two. Trust me, there will be many more opportunities for me to have a problem with characters letting each other live for no reason. And so begins Ellie's quest for revenge as she sets out with her new girlfriend to track down the group that played putt-putt golf with Joel's skull, and catch up with Tommy, who's already left to do the same. And at first, I was on board with this journey. Ellie and Dina make a good duo. They have solid chemistry, and there's enjoyable dialogue between the two. They reminisce, talk about their past, their hopes and dreams, and make little jokes throughout their time together. Their relationship has time to build, and an extended pseudo-open world section early on gives you, the player, plenty of time to get to know and like Dina. While I fully expected something bad to happen to her at some point, I was more than happy to have her along.
I think I'm pregnant. What?
Until the story decided to arbitrarily sideline her with the sudden revelation that she's pregnant. This development seems to come out of nowhere as an excuse to take Dina out of the goings-on, and while hindsight does reveal a handful of hints at her condition, they're not overt enough for this reveal to not seem out of left field when it happens. From here forward, the newfound love of Ellie's life is pushed into the background and is mostly there to be a moral dilemma meant to conflict with the revenge quest. Then we have this scene.
What the hell are you doing here?
Now, if you've been following pre-release media for Part 2, this scene is probably familiar, and when it was shown to the public, this happened.
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
Now, Joel is already dead by this point, so there's no way for him to actually show up here. I expected that either Ellie would start seeing visions of Joel as the game went on, or that this was actually Tommy and Ellie is briefly seeing his brother in him. Instead, we get this.
What the hell are you doing here?
I think I'd let you do this on your own.
Oh my god, it's... that guy! This is Jesse, a minor character we were introduced to in the opening hours before the PGA Tour. Some have called this scene alteration a sign of false marketing, and I totally get why someone would feel gypped, but I don't have a problem with it on that level. Using marketing to misdirect isn't unheard of, and while this is a blatant example, I don't think it's worth fussing too much about. The problem I have with this scene is that it makes no sense. How in the hell is he here? He left after these two, so how did he manage to catch up? Wait, no, actually, he didn't catch up. He overshot their location. He's way ahead of them, and given all the obstacles the girls had to overcome, there's no way he should be here. And then he just happens to bump into Ellie in the middle of a huge town crawling with armed aggressors? This whole meetup is very contrived and seems to be shoehorned in. First, so we can have a driver for this crazy vehicle set piece, which is pretty cool. And second, so Jesse can be around to act as a voice of reason, to act as the angel on Ellie's shoulder to hammer in that her girlfriend's condition should take priority and they should go back home to ensure she gets proper medical care. A fair enough argument, but Jesse isn't telling Ellie anything she hasn't already considered, and outside of that, his entire character is pointless. He's a nice enough guy, I don't have any problems with him as a person, but he shows up out of nowhere to serve an unnecessary purpose, and then chills in the background before having a very abrupt exit.
Headshot.
You could easily write him out entirely without having to change much. To put a halt on the negativity, there is one part of The Last of Us Part 2 that you won't find anyone complaining about, and those are the flashbacks with Joel and Ellie. These handful of looks into the past we get that further flesh out the father-daughter relationship as it progressed over the years are pretty much perfect. The birthday trip to the museum has tons of great character moments, and is an uplifting change of pace from the mostly bleak subject matter seen up to this point. The other two flashbacks that show Ellie conflicted towards Joel as she begins to doubt his account of what happened with the Fireflies, and then confirming her suspicions and confronting him about what he did head-on are also great. I'm sure some would have preferred it to remain ambiguous as to whether or not Ellie ever believed Joel, but I think if you're going to answer that question definitively, this is the exact right way to do it. So, revenge. That's what this whole story is about. Here's this character we like, that players of the first game are invested in, and we get to see how Ellie's singular drive for vengeance sends her down a dark, destructive path. However, this attempt to portray Ellie as a ruthless killing machine blinded by hate and a desire for justice is neutered because, with one exception, every time she catches up with a member of the group that killed Joel, the scene is written in a way that has her ending her target in self-defense. There's no question as to whether Ellie is going too far. Ellie never guns down her prey in cold blood. She's never given the chance to. They strike first, and she's forced to defend herself, which tarnishes the whole downward spiral the writers seem to want to get across. Look at the scene where Ellie kills the pregnant girl, whose name I don't remember. Ellie corners these two and has them at gunpoint. They then instantly recognize her. Now, maybe I'm crazy, but in this situation, I feel like one of the first things you would do as the couple being threatened would be to declare far and wide that a woman in the room is expecting. That news would give any aggressor pause, but no, they keep that tidbit to themselves and then do dumb shit like get closer and go for the gun, which works out how you expect. Then pregnant girl lunges at Ellie with a knife and after a struggle ends up getting stabbed in the throat. Only now does Ellie learn about the baby, and she is understandably horrified by what she has done. But imagine how much more effective this scene would be if it played out differently. If Ellie shot the girl right away to show she meant business, then learned the truth and was horrified by her rash action. Or if you really want to show she's losing it, have them tell her about the pregnancy, but have her not care. Admittedly, that's probably going too far, but it would at least better convey the theme the game is trying to get across. As it stands, she did a terrible thing, but she had no way of knowing what she was about to do and acted in a justified manner given the context. And then Tommy and Jesse show up like 10 seconds later out of nowhere. In order to get here, Ellie had to take an extended boat ride through rapids, overcome various obstacles, and then had to swim through pounding waves once her ride capsized. There is no way these guys got here this fast, except that the plot needed them to, so logic be damned.
Team B. Come in, Team B. Listen, Team B, we found another path to the generator. There's actually a nice heated walkway to it, so you don't need to walk through all that sewage. Oh, well, forget I said that then.
The exception I mentioned earlier is when she's interrogating that one doctor lady who I also don't remember the name of. She refuses to give up Abby's location, so Ellie slowly beats her to death to make her talk. This is shown to visibly shake up our heroine. She is not okay with what she just did, and the scenes immediately afterward do an effective job of conveying that. The problem is that it's kinda hard to buy that this particular incident would greatly affect Ellie, given that it was preceded by multiple hours of... And while the emotional toll of this act is displayed to us well, Ellie quickly goes back to how she was before, and the incident never comes up again once it served its dramatic purpose. Once every member of Abby's group is dealt with, aside from the club wielder herself, Ellie, Tommy, and Jesse decide it's best to drop the whole crusade and return home for Dina's sake. Unfortunately, this is when Abby herself shows up, and understandably furious about the death of her friends, prepares to execute Ellie on the spot.
Dad? Dad?
And then we're jarringly interrupted when we are thrown into a flashback where we proceed to play as Abby. For 8 hours. Look, I get what the writers are doing here. It's all about perspective. Everyone is the hero of their own story. We're presented a parallel between Ellie, a character we like at the start, whose drive for revenge is destroying her, and Abby, a character we hate at the start, who's completed her quest for vengeance and strives to help those close to her. One is on a downward slope, the other is on an incline. We learn why Abby wanted to hunt down Joel, and the group we've been going after as Ellie is humanized. We see that they aren't bad people, they aren't monsters, they're just trying to survive like anyone else. I will give Naughty Dog credit, because it takes balls to force players into the shoes of the antagonist and ask them to sympathize with her. But this doesn't work especially well for a variety of reasons. First, we're shown straight away why Abby had it out for Joel. It's revealed that her father was the surgeon Joel murdered at the end of the first game, which I actually think is cool because while it's entirely possible to stealth by all the Fireflies in that final level, you have no choice but to slaughter the surgeon. He's in your way, he's the last thing standing between Joel and his new daughter, so it's a memorable kill that every player would see. But once we're shown why Abby went after Joel, we don't really need anything else. Her motivations are made clear from the get-go, and everything after this scene feels unnecessary. Second, while Abby and her group are given more personality, none of them are interesting enough to justify the amount of screen time given. They aren't bad characters, they're just standard and not very memorable. That's why I struggle to recall any of their names, outside of Owen, and the only reason I know what he's called is because he's Abby's love interest and therefore the one given the most fleshing out. Everyone else is just fodder for Ellie that I could care less about. The main thing about them that sticks out to me is they're all irresponsible morons for letting a pregnant woman out on patrol because shit like this can happen. And lastly, this whole flashback is awkwardly placed. Cutting away from what seems to be the end of Ellie's story for the length of an entire game is incredibly jarring and only serves to make the player impatient. I'd wager that while playing through the Abby part, many people kept thinking to themselves, so when are we going to get back to the character I actually care about? I think this whole alternative perspective could work if it was distributed better. Maybe jump between Ellie and Abby chapter to chapter so we don't spend too much time with one or the other, or cut out Abby's portion entirely and have it be its own separate campaign. I'd actually be very curious to see someone piece the events together in a different order to see if it would make the narrative flow in a smoother, more natural way. As it is, though, playing as Abby feels like an overly long side quest that distracts from the actual narrative. The writing of Abby's campaign also has its problems. Like here, Abby gets blindsided and captured by the cultist group her organization is at war with, but why? It's been established in dialogue, collectible notes, and gameplay encounters themselves that this group, known as the Scars, kill non-believers on sight. They show no mercy. If you aren't with them, you're expendable, so why the hell do they capture Abby and not just kill her? Especially after she just wiped out a few dozen of them. Oh, it's so she has a reason to bump into these two kids and they couldn't figure out a more natural way to do it. Speaking of these kids, these two are former Scars who become Abby's driving force from here on. She's compelled to help them after seeing them under attack by their own people, and risks her life to ensure they get proper medical attention and have a safe place to go. And why are they being hunted exactly? Because one of them, Lev, is struggling with identity issues. Let's just say Lev doesn't feel comfortable in his own body, and the religious group he has dedicated his life to isn't exactly accepting of alternative lifestyle choices. If that struggle seems a bit on the nose to you with some obvious real-world inspirations, that's because it is, but I don't have a problem with it. The message conveyed here isn't exactly subtle, but there's nothing wrong with it either, and I don't think the revelation about Lev really adds or takes away from anything. It's more a device used to cause conflict, and it's that conflict that leads to Lev's sister being killed, Abby going AWOL from her unit, and the two escaping a massive faction war only for Abby to stumble across the aftermath of her friend's murders. It's here that we catch up to present day. Abby almost shoots Ellie but is stopped by Tommy, who gets shot in the face for his efforts. Then we play an extended game of cat and mouse with our other main character, which ultimately results in Ellie getting her face punched in. Dina tries to make the save, but is quickly overpowered. Abby is ready to slit Dina's throat, even after Ellie tells her she's pregnant, but Lev manages to break through the rage and she stops. And then...
Don't ever let me see you again.
Abby just leaves. Bullshit. I understand coming to your senses and sparing the girl you just learned is pregnant, but there is no reason not to finish Ellie off. She murdered your friends, including the love of your life, and was just trying really hard to kill you. There is no plausible explanation for why she would let her off with a warning. Hell, Abby already let her live once before, and that backfired. So what in God's name is stopping her here other than more contrived writing? I'm not saying I want Ellie to die, but this change of heart just does not add up. Suddenly, we experience a time jump, with Ellie living a peaceful life on a farm with Dina and her stepson. This leap forward is so jarring and the setting is so idyllic that I assumed this whole bit was a dream sequence at first, but no, all of this is really happening. The picturesque curtain is pulled back a bit when it's revealed Ellie suffers from PTSD, haunted by Joel's death and the business left unfinished. Things change when Tommy shows up, who somehow survived that bullet to the head, who has a lead on Abby's location. Ellie, trying to move on, refuses to go after her, which causes Tommy to angrily storm out like a spoiled brat. The same guy who was perfectly willing to let his brother's killer go unpunished for the sake of helping loved ones, now finds the very same notion to be a betrayal. Of course, Ellie can't let things go, and decides to go after Abby again despite the protests of her partner. We're then once again playing as Abby out of nowhere, which we only do so for a grand total of 10 minutes, long enough to watch her get jumped by some random group of thugs. Honestly, both our heroines get surprise attacked so many times over the course of the game, you begin to question how either has survived in this world as long as they have. Then we're back to Ellie, who's still hot on the trail. She ends up getting herself caught in a trap and has the unfortunate luck of being stabbed by a tree branch. She's found later by these two who, wow, what a coincidence, are the same two guys who captured Abby and would know exactly where she is. Ellie manages to escape when the stupider of the two has the genius idea to get within arm's reach of a clicker for no reason, and finds out where this group of brand new baddies that we're being introduced to in the last 2 hours of the game hold their prisoners. She finds their camp, fights through their compound, and finally comes face to face with her prey. The one she blames for ruining her life. The one responsible for the nightmare she sees when she closes her eyes. Abby is strung up, helpless, an easy target. Ellie has thrown away everything to find and kill this person. So what does Ellie do? She cuts her down. Why? I could see this making sense if she found Abby in a significantly worse state. If she was just broken, beaten, malnourished, barely hanging on as a pathetic sliver of her former self, then I could see Ellie maybe taking pity on her, rationalizing that she'd suffered enough. But as is, there's no reason Ellie just doesn't end her. They then come to a pair of boats, and I was thinking that they were just gonna go their separate ways, which would have made this entire journey pointless. While Ellie considers doing that, she ultimately decides to confront Abby in one final showdown. This battle is equal parts brutal because of the damage the two inflict on one another, and awkward because it relies on the finicky dodge system. Each lady gets in some real good hits. Ellie even gets 2 of her fingers completely bitten off, but in the end, she wins. Ellie has Abby pinned under the water. She is drowning Joel's killer. It was a long, painful journey, but she finally accomplished her mission and she lets her go. This 180 comes out of nowhere. Before Ellie lets her go, there's a brief flash of Joel from a later scene where the two talk about forgiveness. So I think the implication is that she suddenly forgives Abby, but not only is there no reason for her to, it invalidates everything she's went through up to this point. She left her family, got horribly wounded, killed a crap ton of randos, and lost her fingers, and it was all for nothing. I just don't buy it. I understand that the ultimate moral being conveyed is revenge is bad, vengeance begets vengeance, it's a cycle that only leads to misery, but that moral would work just as well if Abby died. Ellie would have still lost everything, but at least she would have accomplished something. Here, she lost everything and totally wasted her time. Seemingly content, Ellie returns back to her farm and finds it abandoned. Her father figure is dead. Her love has left her. Her stepson is gone. She can't even play guitar anymore because of her missing digits, so she's lost the one remaining connection she had to Joel. Ellie has nothing left. She's all alone, and it was all for nothing. A hollow journey constructed to deliver a hollow, overdone lesson. I said near the start of this video that I always found The Last of Us to be somewhat overrated, but one aspect of it I will never dismiss is its ending. It ends on the perfect note, leaving you with this internal debate about what Joel just did and the lies he told Ellie, leaving it ambiguous as to whether she believes the story he told her. It left itself open for multiple interpretations and arguments about what each one of us would do if put in the same position. The ending made you feel something. But as Ellie left her guitar and headed off to an uncertain future, I wasn't upset or angry our lead had lost everything, because the way in which she lost it felt forced and unnecessary. She had wasted her time pursuing a goal she ultimately abandoned for contrived reasons, and I had wasted my time experiencing it. When the screen cut to black, I wasn't struck with sadness as I thought back on all the death and suffering, or left considering the implications of what I had seen and done. Instead, I felt nothing. And that is the primary reason why I believe The Last of Us Part 2 fails. That is, of course, just my opinion. This is absolutely not a bad game, but it is a big step down from the original. Let me know your thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2 down in the comments below. Feel free to pick apart anything I said and offer your own counter-arguments. I'm very interested to hear the other side. Please take a moment to rate the video one way or the other, and subscribe to the Critical Nobody channel if you think I'm worth it. Thank you once again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to play the real game of the year.